Hello and welcome to today's session of PreSales Insight. This session is about transforming into as a service. As this topic is quite complex, we are splitting it up into 3 sessions that we would go by one to make a complete stuff from starting with the basics into transformation until you have got your utility pricing. My name is Sascha Oehl and I'm a PreSales leader here in Europe, and I grow pre-sales organizations from technology point of view, financial point of view and business point of view. And this is one of the topics that I feel should be in everybody's toolbox. As mentioned, the topic is split into 3 different items, and we're doing it part by part. We're starting with the basics. The basics in that case is everything that you need to know and to understand to see the request of a customer and put it into the right context. Then we will design a solution in a kind of a CapEx way and transform it into capacity as a service. And then in the third part, we will go the next step. We're adding hosting, management, flexibility like scale up and scale down, and we're putting this all onto utility pricing. Look, these sessions will be a mixture, partially run in PowerPoint, as you see right now, but also in your favorite spreadsheet tool like Excel, Numbers, or whatever. So let's quickly start with the basics. Transforming into as a service. Our agenda today, you can see, is covering the overview of the solution and things to look out for. With these 2 things, we are then ready to go into a requirement to an as-a-service offering in the next 2 sessions. Let's start easy. What's the difference between as-a-service and a standard offering? Yeah, you know it. It's CapEx versus OpEx. In the one point, CapEx, you buy a solution. You buy the hardware, the equipment that you need, you utilize it to give it to your customers. You have the mandates to operate it. You buy professional services, bring it in, or you have your own stuff. And you own a data center. Everything under one umbrella. In the OpEx view, when we really go as a service, there are some variations that we see in the next page. But basically, it goes into the direction of having the capacity, the management, the hosting, charged as a service. You can compare it a bit to like a power generator. A CapEx solution would be you buy a diesel generator, put it in your garden, you operate, you maintain it, and you consume the electricity. On the other side, the OpEx solutions would be like plugging in into the grid and getting the capacity, or in that case, the power that you need to drive an electronic equipment right from the grid. So you're not looking into like where is the power plant, how is the power plant built, how is it operated, maintained, managed. You're just consuming the outcome and you're paying on a unit price. While in the CapEx, you would buy everything on your own and however you like it or not. If you're using it much, it could be cheaper. If you're using it not so much, it could be more expensive. Same works here. So let's look into the responsibilities as we just started with the example of the power operator. So when we're in IT and we are with a standard CapEx, then the customer is responsible for ownership, operation and housing. If we go full managed service on the other side, the provider is responsible for ownership, operation, housing and everything around, operating the equipment to fulfill the SLA. But as you see, there are variations in between. So not always when you see a utility price or an as-a-service price request, it's not always meant as a complete as-a-service offering. Sometimes the customer probably just wants a capacity as a service. So it's still in their data center, they run the kit, but you are the owner and you charge them by utilized units. So you see a lot of variations. But the good thing for us is basically the differences are more contextual. If you look at the calculation, it's just adding and adding and adding another service on top to have the full service. A warning. The example that we'll be using during this course will be a model with some simplifications. Otherwise, it would be probably too big to fit into these 3 sessions. But you will see that these simplifications are obvious and visible, and that you could easily exchange it with more specific topics and items to make it more concrete. Everything that we put into this course will help you to calculate your own as a service model. Let's start with the basic things that we want to look out for. You will see terms like architecture authority, flexibility or scale up, scale down. You will see buffer volumes, base capacity, growth and minimum commit. Let's look at it one by one. The first thing is architectural authority. Let's start it that way. In a utility model, you are responsible to fulfill an SLA. In the first thinking, this would mean it's your problem how you do it. And sometimes it's exactly this. But there are also other implementations of as a service. It varies. So architecture authority defines who has responsibility to define the architecture that's running to fulfill the service. So it starts with the customer defines the provider's architecture. In that case, you cannot do cost optimization. And you are responsible for having the SLAs fulfilled with the architecture provided by your customer. This is a solution that gives you very, very few flexibility to make a good offer. The next step will be the customer approves provider's architecture. In that case, you are responsible for the architecture, but your architecture needs a sign-off of the customer. And if they don't like it, you can't run the architecture for their environment, and therefore you can't get the cost benefits that you probably have calculated. The third level, the most mature level, is the customer trust provider's architecture. In that case, you're running basically purely an SLA. If the SLA is not fulfilled, it's your problem. If it's fulfilled, it's green. In that case, the customer don't care about the architecture that you're using and gives you the maximum flexibility. In most of the as a service offerings that you see and the requests in the market, it usually varies a bit between the customer approves the architecture and the customer trust architecture. But look out, also the others exist. The second point to look out for is flexibility. Flexibility, scale up, scale down. Sometimes we right in the first moment mix this with an as a service model. A bit like a hyperscaler, like a cloud provider. I can use a lot today and nothing tomorrow, and the next day I can choose again. This flexibility only works if you can share the environment with different users or different customers. So if the one customer is not using it, another can use the resources. In most of the as a service offerings that you will see, it's a bit different. It's an environment that's bound to one customer. This means if you are not using this capacity for this customer, if they are not consuming the units, then you have a lot of hardware deployed, you have the burden of the cost, but you can't settle the units to recover the cost. Therefore, scale up and scale down usually comes with an uplift. It's a risk factor that you apply just in case the customer is not consuming as much as you thought. On the other side, the customer could help you. Sometimes they offer you something like growth bands, where they give a probability for having a higher or a lower growth. And you can apply different uplifts for different growth levels. This is an optimal thing for a customer because it gives flexibility and also helps a provider to manage the risk. The third point we look for is a minimum commit. A minimum commit is the minimum number of units that are settled within a contract period. Like if you're charging every quarter, then this minimum commit says this is the minimum number of units you will charge for a quarter. This is taking away some of the flexibility, but gives you as a provider a better calculation base. How does it work? Basically it says this is a minimum level we will never drop below. If we drop below, we pay the minimum level. So for you, the minimum commit is the number of units you can 100% calculate with. So all the risk for flex up and flex down just goes in the bucket above, in the flexibility case where you go up and down. For us this is important because the flexibility is more costly than the committed base. So it helps you to make a better offer for your customer. And let's be clear, for most customers, yes, it looks like they're giving away some freedom, but in reality, it's very unlikely that they stop using your service after a year or 2 or 3. Because if you store the data or you process the data, this is something that they will need to do also in the future. On the other way, it gives you more flexibility to have your customer protected. Without a minimum commit and without a flexibility factor, it's easy for the customer to drive down your contract to 0 after a year and go to another vendor if necessary or wanted. The next thing that we look at is the buffer volume. Basically, the buffer volume defines the volume or the capacity that you put on top of the units that you settle. Let's say you are settling 20,000 units to a customer. And you know they're growing, they're having some short-term needs, sometimes they need something here, something there, but just for a day or so. This is something that they would do in the buffer. Usually the buffer is not settled or just settled if used. It's a free capacity, the headroom for growth that you'd give to your customer. Sometimes the customers define the level that they want, and in that case, it's important for you to fulfill the requirement. In others, you simply want to give them the headroom because you cannot deploy new hardware within a day or within an hour, and it takes some time and you don't want to stop your customer from growing. So buffer capacity, something you put in your calculation. That's capacity that you're probably not settling for, but that you have to pay the hardware cost for. Okay, I know a few basics that you always need in a calculation. What is the base capacity? So what is the capacity the customer starts with? That's the minimal hardware deployment that you have to do, and this is the baseline for your service costing. On top of the base capacity, you would apply the growth rate, like we're growing 20% or 30% year over year. Then you know the capacity that's most likely at end of the year, at end of next year, or at end of the next quarter. These growth rates are good for extrapolating the capacity, and it helps you to choose the right solution. So let's say you look into the capacity and the growth rate, and with the starting capacity you would say probably it's a mid-size solution, but when you look at the growth factors, you understand if you start with a mid-size solution, you will have to do a hardware refresh right in year 2 because then the customer is grown. Not very effective, so you would start with a bigger solution probably right from the beginning, or a more scalable solution to fulfill the needs of the customer. Good. These are the very basic 6 things to look at. What else is important? The first thing is you have to know your financing cost. So the interest rate you have to pay for lending and that you get for saving money. Then you need your hurdle rate. Your hurdle rate defines the percentage of margin that you have to have. If you fall below, the project is not attractive for your company and your company will not go for it. So it's like the minimum margin that you have to put on top on everything that happens. The third thing you have to find out is the asset ownership. Do you want, as your company, to have all the assets you use in an aaS service in your books? Or do you feel better with having it probably in a lease company's book or somewhere else? Something you have to sort right in the beginning. Yes, for sure, you have to know the contract period. So what is the contract term? Are we looking for a year, for 5 years? Is it something for 5 years with an option to extend for 2 for the customer? This is all stuff that you need to know to make your calculation. You have to know your solution and you have to build some base blocks. Basic blocks, upgrade blocks, so you can have like a factory for having the upgrades, to not having a very own solution in every quarter, but something easy you can calculate on, because you have to work a lot with price erosion and stuff, and therefore you need kind of a 2 or 3 basic blocks describing the solution for the customer. One last important thing to know is the point of measurement. So the customer is charged for the consumption. That's okay. That's something that is basic in an aaS service. But there are different ways to measure the amount of units the customers get charged for. You could probably look into the peak consumption during a period. So you're looking back the last quarter, you're saying, what is a peak consumption? And you take this peak and charge the whole quarter for. Another one would be the average. So you're looking into each day, each second of the quarter, and you're building the average of the consumption and you're charging this. Or you probably measure the consumption at a specific date, like the last day of the quarter, the last day of the month, or mid of the month, or the quarter, or whatever. You have to know this because it impacts the money that you are borrowing or the money that you're saving, because this directly gives you 2 things. When do I get the money for the last term? And how is it charging? How is the buffer? So these are things you have to look out for. Yeah, that was the basics. We have looked into the overview of the solutions. We have to look into things to look out for. And this was the base concept for running aaS service. In the next session and modules, we will go exactly into the CapEx view, into a capacity as a service, and then we add all the other things on top. Thank you for joining me today, and I'm looking forward to see you again in session number 2.